Why do so many people over 60 feel that the mind is changing faster than the body? That question usually appears in silence. It doesn't get voiced at medical appointments. It isn't mentioned in conversations with friends. It isn't easily admitted even to the people closest to you. It exists as an internal unease, as a thought that surfaces in the clearer moments and is quickly pushed away, because admitting it out loud would make real something that's still being treated as temporary. The body still manages to walk, still manages to cook, go out, have conversations, make plans. It still carries the routine with a functionality that doesn't betray, at least not visibly, at least not in ways others can easily see. But the mind feels different. Slower in ways that are difficult to describe with precision. More distant in ways that don't have a clear name. As if something is changing from the inside without a clear warning, without a defining event, without a marked date, without a clear line separating the before from the after. And the change manifests in details. It all begins discreetly. A simple word that disappears mid-sentence. Not an obscure word. Not a technical term you rarely use. A common word? The one that was forming the thought, the one that would complete the idea, that simply doesn't appear when you need it. You pause. You work around it. You find an alternative that isn't exactly what you meant to say. And the conversation continues. But something was left behind. An object lost for the third time in the same day. Not on an unusual day, not in a moment of exceptional distraction. On an ordinary day, within an ordinary routine, with the same attention you always had. A question repeated without realizing it. You're in the middle of a conversation. You ask something, receive an answer, and minutes later ask again with no memory of having already asked. And you notice in the other person's expression that it wasn't the first time. Small lapses that seem normal at first glance, easy to justify individually. You were tired, you were worried, you had too much on your mind, until the frequency makes the justification unsustainable, until the point where they start happening far too often. And then something far heavier than the forgetting itself emerges. Insecurity. That specific feeling that perhaps the mind is slipping away gradually. That the lapses aren't isolated accidents, but patterns. That the trajectory isn't heading in the direction you want. But there is an important part of this story that most people don't know at all. A part that fundamentally shifts the perspective, not to minimize what's happening, but to understand what's behind it and what can be done about it. The brain isn't just aging. It is responding to the environment created for it. And a crucial part of that environment is what happens during the night. The brain works intensively while you sleep. And that statement isn't metaphor or motivational simplification. It's a literal description of critical physiological processes that happen predominantly during sleep and that determine, to a large extent, how the brain will function the next day and across the years. During deep sleep, neural connections are reorganized. The brain processes the information received throughout the day, decides what to consolidate into long-term memory and what to discard, strengthens the synapses associated with important learning, and integrates new knowledge with what already exists in ways that aren't possible during waking hours. Important memories are strengthened, not just stored, but actively processed, contextualized, and integrated into the existing knowledge network. Metabolic waste accumulated throughout the day begins to be eliminated. The glymphatic system, a network of channels surrounding the brain's blood vessels, becomes highly active during deep sleep, circulating cerebrospinal fluid through brain tissue and removing proteins and other residues that, when accumulated, compromise neural function. It's as if the brain enters a silent maintenance and repair shift, a shift that most people don't know about and that, precisely for this reason, is rarely adequately prioritized. And it is exactly in this nighttime moment, in this period of maximum recovery activity, that certain nutrients can make a significant difference. It was exactly from the understanding of these nightly processes that researchers identified simple food compounds that directly support brain recovery during sleep. You'll find it at the first link in the description. That's when a small seed began drawing growing attention from researchers and specialists in healthy aging. Small, simple, easy to find in any grocery store for a few dollars, that most people either completely ignore or use randomly, without understanding what it can offer when incorporated at the right moment in the routine, with the correct understanding of why it works. Flaxseed. And to understand why this specific seed deserves attention in the context of nightly brain health, and why it can produce changes that people describe as progressive and surprisingly consistent, you need to understand the mechanisms behind the compounds it contains. The first and most studied compound is alpha-linolenic acid, the plant-based omega-3. Flaxseed is the dietary source with the highest concentration of plant-based omega-3 available in the human diet. And omega-3 matters for the brain for very specific reasons that go beyond what most people know. Approximately 60% of the brain's dry weight is composed of fat. A significant portion of that brain fat consists of polyunsaturated fatty acids from the omega-3 family, essential structural components of neuron membranes. The fluidity of those membranes determines the efficiency of synaptic transmission, the speed at which electrical signals propagate between neurons, and the effectiveness with which neurotransmitters are released and received. When the diet is chronically poor in omega-3, neural membranes progressively become more rigid, less responsive, and that structural rigidity manifests functionally as exactly the symptoms we're describing: slow thinking, difficulty accessing memories, increased response time. The alpha-linolenic acid in flaxseed is the precursor to DHA, the omega-3 that is the majority structural component of neural membranes. The conversion isn't perfect, but the consistent provision of this precursor makes a real and progressive contribution to omega-3 availability in brain tissue. And there is a specific aspect of nighttime timing that amplifies this effect. During sleep, the brain is actively incorporating new materials into the neural membranes being repaired and reorganized. The availability of omega-3 fatty acids during this nighttime period, provided by a light evening meal that includes flaxseed, creates more favorable conditions for this structural maintenance process to happen more completely. The second critical compound is lignans. Flaxseed is the dietary source with the highest concentration of lignans available, substances with a structure similar to phytoestrogens that have demonstrated antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties specific to neural tissue. Low-grade chronic inflammation, that silent state of immune alert that inadequate diet, sedentary living, and stress sustain over time, is one of the factors most consistently associated with cognitive decline in the most recent research. Flaxseed's lignans contribute to the modulation of that inflammatory state through mechanisms that include inhibiting certain pro-inflammatory signaling pathways and reducing systemic inflammatory markers. In practical terms, they help create a progressively less inflammatory internal environment, and a brain operating in a lower inflammatory state processes information more efficiently, consolidates memories more completely, and recovers more easily from the day's wear. The third element is soluble fiber, specifically the type that flaxseed contains in notable concentration. The connection between gut health and brain health, the gut-brain axis, is one of the most significant discoveries of neuroscience in recent years. The gut produces approximately 90% of the body's serotonin, It has its own nervous system with more than 500 million neurons, and it communicates continuously with the brain through the vagus nerve and other bidirectional pathways. Flaxseed's soluble fiber is a prebiotic, a substrate that feeds beneficial intestinal bacteria. When these bacteria ferment the fiber, they produce short-chain fatty acids, especially butyrate, that have demonstrated neuroprotective and anti-inflammatory properties that extend to the central nervous system. And there is a specific nighttime timing mechanism here as well. The digestive system has its own circadian rhythms, and the gut microbiota is particularly active during the nighttime period. Consuming prebiotic fiber before sleep creates a favorable environment for fermentation processes to happen during the night, with the resulting systemic effects aligned with the period of greatest brain recovery activity. The fourth component is antioxidants, especially the lignans and phenolic compounds present in flaxseed. Oxidative stress, the damage caused by free radicals that are inevitable byproducts of intense cellular metabolism, is particularly problematic for neural tissue. The brain, due to its extremely high oxygen consumption, is continuously generating free radicals that need to be adequately neutralized. When the body's antioxidant capacity is insufficient to handle this production, the result is progressive oxidative damage that compromises the function and integrity of neural cells. Flaxseed's antioxidant compounds contribute to expanding the body's antioxidant defense capacity, creating a more protected cellular environment that is especially relevant during the nighttime period of neural repair and recovery. And the fifth element is the magnesium present in the seeds. Magnesium participates in more than 300 biochemical reactions in the body, and many of them directly involve the central nervous system. It regulates NMDA receptors, critical structures for synaptic plasticity and memory consolidation. It facilitates entry into the deep phases of sleep, where brain recovery processes are most intense, and it participates in the synthesis of GABA, the main inhibitory neurotransmitter that creates the state of neural calm necessary for deep sleep to happen. Not one isolated magic ingredient, the combination. Compounds that act through different but convergent mechanisms that complement and potentiate each other, that together create a progressively more favorable nighttime environment for the brain to do the recovery work that determines how it will function the next day. But there is a dimension of this story that goes far beyond the biochemical mechanisms. A dimension that is rarely discussed with enough honesty in conversations about cognitive health, but that for those living through the first signs of decline can be the heaviest to carry. When small moments of forgetting start happening with frequency, they don't remain as isolated facts. They accumulate into an internal narrative that keeps getting heavier. The person starts reviewing everything multiple times, not out of obsession, but out of real necessity. Checks whether the stove was turned off, whether the door was locked, whether the medication was taken. Not once, but 2, 3 times, because the memory that should register these acts isn't providing the certainty it should. Avoids long conversations with the silent fear of losing the reasoning thread in the middle. Speaks less in groups because the risk of forgetting something obvious or repeating something already said is too high. And feels shame when repeating stories without realizing it. That specific embarrassment, noticing in someone's eyes that this story has already been heard before, is difficult to describe to those who haven't experienced it. It's a momentary rupture of something that should be continuous. Public evidence of a limitation one would prefer to keep private. And gradually, underneath all those individual moments, something silent and far deeper grows. The fear of losing independence, not abstractly, in a very concrete and very close way. The fear of no longer being able to organize your own life without help, of no longer being able to make simple decisions with the confidence that always existed, of becoming dependent on the people you love, on external systems, on others to do for you what you were always capable of doing alone. Because it isn't just about remembering names or dates. It's about continuing to be the author of your own life. It's about maintaining the freedom to decide your own steps, to manage your own routine, to be who you always were. Not a diminished version, not a person who needs to be cared for in ways that compromise dignity. That is the fear almost nobody admits, but that underlies practically everything when memory lapses start becoming frequent. If you want to start this process today, understanding how nighttime flaxseed fits into a broader brain protection protocol and what researchers have isolated about this approach, you'll find it at the first link in the description. As simple as it always should have been. But here is the genuinely good news. The kind grounded in real science, not empty optimism. Studies on neuroplasticity, the adult brain's capacity to create new synaptic connections, reorganize neural routes, and respond positively to adequate stimulation, consistently and replicably show that the brain continues capable of responding positively throughout life, even after 60, even after 70 and 80. The idea that the adult brain is fixed, that after a certain age connections can only decrease, never increase, has been completely overturned by the scientific evidence accumulated over the last 3 decades. Neuroimages of older adults who implemented the right conditions show measurable structural changes. Increased hippocampal volume, greater integrity of communication structures between brain regions, greater synaptic density in regions associated with memory and reasoning. When the brain receives adequate nutrients, truly restorative sleep, physical movement that stimulates neurotrophic factors, and consistent cognitive stimulation, it can maintain important functions for far longer than the inevitability narrative suggests. Small actions repeated daily have more impact than dramatic solutions attempted a single time. Nighttime flaxseed is one of those small actions. The simplest way to incorporate it, hydrating it for a few minutes in water, yogurt, or plant milk before sleep, or mixing it ground into a light fruit, into a yogurt with honey, into any low-glycemic evening snack. The hydrated version has slightly better absorption for some of the active compounds. The ground version ensures the seeds don't pass through the digestive system whole without releasing their compounds. 1 tablespoon. Nightly consistency. Weeks of continuous use for the progressive effects to start becoming perceptible. Not as an isolated miracle. As part of a broader set that includes adequate sleep, regular physical movement, genuine cognitive stimulation, stress management, and anti-inflammatory nutrition throughout the day. Because the brain responds to what you do repeatedly, not to what you try for a day, not to the heroic effort of 1 week followed by abandonment, not to the magic solution that replaces all other elements of care. It responds to consistency, to the correct direction maintained over enough time for the neural system to recognize it as a pattern and organize itself around it. Perhaps your brain isn't failing without reason. Perhaps it has been, for a long time, waiting for the right support. The nutrients it needed, and that weren't arriving in sufficient quantity. The deep sleep that was never fully prioritized. The internal environment that would facilitate the nightly recovery that was always possible, but that never received the conditions to happen completely. There is a possible, accessible, evidence-based path for strengthening memory, preserving autonomy, and living this phase of life with more clarity, more security, and more hope than the inevitability narrative suggested was possible. And sometimes, most of the time actually, everything begins with small changes made at the right moment. With a seed, hydrated, 1 hour before sleep, repeated, night after night, until the system that was waiting realizes the support has arrived and begins to respond. The complete method is in the pinned comment. And if this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel. In the upcoming videos, I'll keep showing you natural and intelligent strategies to protect the mind, recover mental clarity, and help you maintain your independence and freedom for much longer.